All right, Chad, your loser from the deadline.
Yeah, so we just finished talking about a team who didn't do anything at the deadline, and I want to talk about a team who might as well have not done anything at the deadline, and that's my Toronto Maple Leafs. Coming in, they added Ilya Lyubushkin, who is, a bottom pairing caliber defenseman. They added Joel Edmondson, who is, a bottom pairing caliber defenseman. They added Connor Dewar, who is a fourth line center, who I guess kills penalties. And they added Cade Weber, who is a 6'7" defensive prospect playing in the NCAA. And out the door, they paid more than a lot of the teams around them who got better pieces. They traded 2/3, a fourth, a fifth, and a sixth. I think they're the losers of this trade deadline because they're wasting a year of this core. They had glaring holes, aka a top 4 puck moving defenseman and a middle 6 defensively minded forward, or at least two-way forward, that they didn't address. And like I've already mentioned, other top teams around them, like Tampa, like Florida, loaded up for essentially the same price or even less and got better pieces in return. So that's my quick spiel about the Leafs. They didn't do anything of note, and I just think it's an absolute mistake and a disaster of a trade deadline.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like they're buying into the narrative that most fans are saying with Toronto right now is next year is their window, their target for a cup. So the team didn't go, gung-ho at the trade deadline, even though they made a lot of deals. It just, none of them were particularly good. And it's especially frustrating when, you hear these connections with Calgary and all the players Calgary is selling, and Tanev would be Tanafin, both of them. Tanev
there
and
go.
Hanifin would be perfect in Toronto, either one of them or both of them, and they got neither of them. It's like, it was just classic NHL media hyping up what the Leafs will do and then it not happening, and it was kind of underwhelming.
To me, it's most frustrating to hear that players who are in their system, like Fraser Minton or Easton Cowan, or, they didn't come out and say this, but like Nick Robertson wasn't really involved in any trade talks, or like even Timothy Liljegren, like good young players. Like, it's frustrating to me that none of these players were even considered to be involved in trades. And it's like, take a note out of Vegas's playbook here. You can trade good players. Just get good players back in return. Like, you can trade your top prospect. Trust me, like I don't want to trade, Fraser Minton, who made the team out of camp this year as a 19-year-old. I don't want to trade Easton Cowan, who's gone 32 straight games in the OHL with a point, setting a London Knights record, by the way. Like, I don't want to trade those guys. But if in exchange you get a Noah Hanifin, or an Elias Lindholm, or a Thomas Hertl, go outside the box, like all of a sudden you start putting real impact players who can make a difference now into the conversation. Then all of a sudden it's like, well, Cowan and Minton, those guys aren't realistically going to help you for another 2-3 years and be impact players. They might make the team, but are they going to be impact players in the next 2 to 3 years? I don't know. So to me, the hesitancy was frustrating.
He's got to be sitting at home right now. Like, I could have got Hertl for Easton Cowan and a first round pick.
Yeah.
Retained.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden you have Tavares and Hertl splitting second line center duties. You're playing them as your middle 6 centers. Tavares doesn't have to play 20 minutes a night out of his league anymore. And Hertl, same thing. And then you've solved the problem, not only for this year, but for the next 6. Like, it just, to me, there was just no outside the box thinking. And I hate to do this because so many Leaf fans disagree with me. And, and I hear all about it, but I hate to be the revisionist guy and do revisionist history, but I think they would be a better team if Kyle Dubas were still here. They would.
You say that, but how did Pittsburgh do at the trade deadline this year?
And
I mean, fair.
The kicker.
Fair, but how was Pittsburgh built after the offseason? A hell of a lot better than the Leafs. You can say their record doesn't indicate that, but we all loved their offseason. We loved the moves they made, and we hated Toronto's. And, I'm kind of wearing that right now. We'll see. I just like this. I've said this before. I'll say it again. This is my least favorite version of this group. All of that being said, though, I'm still going to bet on them to win, because if I don't and they do, I look like the worst fan on the planet.
Yeah, we all hated this deadline, so they'll win the cup this year.
Exactly. That'd be the Leafiest thing ever, right? So I don't know. That I just had to get that off, because I've gotten so much grief from other Leaf fans who kind of like the change because it's different, right? And like, I respect that opinion, but I don't know. I want to have a conversation on the podcast with John over the next couple of weeks and really break this down. Him and I have been going back and forth. Like, we have some opposing opinions on what the Leafs did. So I would like to do that. Maybe in the next few weeks we will.
Well, there's a couple of things to this with the Leafs deadline. I understand your frustration, but one, there is something to the whole point of, like, making ads on the margins, so to speak. Like, you add Edmondson, you add Lyubushkin, Dewar, who I thought looked good against Montreal. I watched that game on Saturday. I thought, he competed hard on that fourth line, and didn't realize how many minutes he played with Ryan Reeves in Minnesota. So maybe that was part of it, because we know that Tree Living likes Reeves quite a bit. But I don't know, like, there is something to that, like, just making, these small little deals, like adding on the margins, that, as we've seen before, can pay off in the postseason. What if Connor Dewar scores a big goal that wins you a playoff game in overtime? Like, just saying that as an example.
Dude, he might not even be in the lineup, is my point.
Well, I know. And I understand that.
Like, he's a fourth line player. And like, now Lyubushkin, by the way, the back end is the bigger problem for me. Now Lyubushkin is stapled to Morgan Rielly. They've played together before. I was okay that they brought Lyubushkin in for not that much of a price tag, but now you're playing him with your best defenseman? Like, we've seen it work for a bit in the past, but man, look at their top six on the back end and compare it to any other contender in the East. It's not even close.
No, it's not.
It's not even close. And you have the best goal scorer on planet Earth, and you're wasting yet another year. It's just frustrating, man. They had the assets. I hate that argument. People saying that they didn't have the assets. You have them. You just didn't want to trade them. You've got to give to get. And they didn't want to give, so obviously they didn't get.
I mean, I get your frustration. I do. I get where you're coming from. At the same time, though, I don't mind the whole, like, looking ahead sort of thing. Like, and what do we know about Tree Living, right, guys? Like, historically, he does not make big trades at trade deadline. He makes big moves in the summertime. So obviously, but I get it. Like, Matthews is having an all-world season, and they've had a pretty good year. It's kind of a wait and see until the summer, when I think that's when most of the surgery is going to come from the general manager to this team.
I get it. And I don't want to be too hard on the guy, because he did just come in. It was a quick turnaround. He had to learn everybody in the organization, familiarize himself with all the prospects, and go through that whole thing. And it happened rather quickly. So it's tough to blame him. But that being said, like, all of the other management is still around, it's.
And again, just one last thing on the Leafs, like, this summer, there's going to be a lot more flexibility. A lot of guys are coming off the books. Those guys that are on the 1-year deals, Bertuzzi, Domi, and I mean, both of those guys are starting to go now, and we'll see what happens with them. But, there's going to be more flexibility there. And I just feel like, it's going to be it has potential to be a big off season for the Maple Leafs, which historically, Tree Living, again, makes big moves in the offseason. He doesn't do much at the deadline. Like, last year, he made one trade with the Calgary Flames. He traded the swap of the Ritchie brothers with Arizona and Connor Mackey for Troy Stetcher. That was his move. I think the deadline before that, he acquired Calle Jarnkrok from Seattle for a couple of picks. Like, he doesn't make big moves at trade deadline.
So I had a train of thought here while you guys were talking, and that's that, well, sometimes you make the big moves and it doesn't work out either. And that was, my brain instantly went to Tarasenko and Kane, which was last year, which then made me think about how I was wrong earlier in the episode when I said Kopp was last year.
That's 2 years ago?
That was 2 years ago. Yeah.
Oh,
I just
yes.
misremembered that.
Yeah.
And,
Right.
But like the conditions of the trade didn't change. And
Right.
because of that, I think it was 2 firsts and a 5th for Kopp.
Yeah. Well, but
Gotcha.
then like to your point where, you know, teams can go all in and then lose those players for nothing. Of course that happens, but then the alternative is pay the price and get players with term like a team like Tampa has done, or pay the price and convince players to sign again like a team like Tampa has done. So it's like these deals aren't impossible to make. You just have to be willing to give up some pieces, and they very clearly weren't. So I don't know. Another point is next year, we've talked about this on the podcast as well. Next year will be the toughest year cap wise for the Maple Leafs. So how much can really change this offseason? You know, they'll still have Tavares making 11, Marner 10.9, and then both Matthews and Nylander's new deals kick in. So this will be the highest percentage of the cap this upcoming year that the Big Four will make. So like, again, like it just, everything comes back to why not make a push this year? How important is Fraser Minton to your success within your 3-year window? Like it's just baffling to me.
Well, we can say here and talk circles around the Maple Leafs that, you know, all the things we've been saying for a long time for them.
I know.
Let's move on to Harper's Loser.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will do an episode with John on this so that I can talk at length and I don't annoy you guys for talking about the Maple Leafs for too long, because yes, you're right. It has gone on too long, but I just needed to share my thoughts.
Well, good. And we look forward to that episode with John.